Hello and welcome back to Coffee and Conversation. I'm your host Karim Raffa and I'm joined today again with Hal Bosher, the former CEO of YOMA Bank and current chairman of Wave Money. Hal, welcome back on air.
Thanks for having me, Karim.
Can you tell us a bit more about Wave? Because I know that you're heavily involved.
Yeah, I helped to found it, not through any great sort of stroke of genius, but more by chance. We partnered with Telenor, and mobile money is very familiar to telcos. And Telenor was looking for a local partner that had the right level of governance and perhaps a good culture fit with them. And so when I first started to speak with Telenor back in 2013, we were quite a small bank in truth, maybe the number 15, 16, and they chose to work with us, again, because of culture and governance. And then over the years, the bank has grown and the partnership has grown. So Wave Money is effectively the bulk of our business is an over-the-counter and OTC money transfer business. We have roughly 55,000 agents in the country, and we move, the better part of, it's growing every month, but conservatively $4 to $5 billion a year in money transfers with an average ticket size of sort of $50 to $60.
And from a regulatory perspective, is Wave affiliated to YOMA or do they have their own licenses?
It's evolved. So when we founded the business, YOMA Bank had 49% of the business and Telenor had the remainder. And then the central bank had a concern with perhaps an overconcentration in financial services. And so we, long story short, sold down, we being YOMA Bank, sold down to YOMA Strategic, our listed partner that is listed on the Singapore Exchange. We first sold to FMI, which is a local listed company, and then to YOMA Strategic. So today, YOMA Strategic own 44% and YOMA Bank 5%.
I'd like to come back to the regulatory aspect and also the licenses and how that entire scenery has evolved in Myanmar over the last 10, 20 years. Singapore, as you know, has a certain quota of banking and digital banking licenses that they issue every year or every quarter. How does that look in Myanmar and how has that evolved?
It's not as structured and not as planned, if you like. One of your earlier questions was which license does Wave operate under? It operates under the Mobile Financial Services license, which is in fact available to primarily telcos, not to banks. It's seen as distinct from the banking sector. In fact, all of the telcos now have launched mobile money services. The industry is well provided for. From a regulatory perspective, there are three main categories. There are banks, mobile money, and perhaps MFIs, microfinance institutions. And mobile money has a dotted line to the Ministry of Telecom, but primarily is regulated by the central bank. Equally are commercial banks. And then MFIs are regulated by FRD, which is a subset of the Ministry of Finance. So it's somewhat fragmented. And I think the regulators continue to be more reactive than proactive in designing the financial architecture.
Telcos being involved in transactions and financial transactions or microtransactions especially is kind of the beginning of a payment space when it comes to fintech, right?
It is. And look, this is where, at least for us, Ant comes in. There is something called Myanmar Payment Union, MPU, which is a switch between banks, which for the time being is used primarily by cards through a card network. Mobile money tends not to be, it's OTT over the top in terms of mobile money providers. So you can have an Ooredoo card and use Wave. So Wave sits on top of a number of different telcos and is somewhat agnostic. But at the same time, most of the mobile money providers are not interoperable. If you can't transfer money, for example, between, say, Ooredoo solution and Wave Money. So it tends to be somewhat enclosed in that respect.
Where does the future lie in the fintech space in Myanmar? I know that payments is always the gateway when it comes to entering these frontier markets, but what comes next?
Mobile money and banks each have part of the solution. So mobile money, to a large extent, has distribution, right? Lots of customers. On the other hand, banks have balance sheet. They have money that can be lent. And I think the intersection of those two will be the future in the country, meaning making credit more widely available and amounts of credit that serve the needs of the people. So many Myanmar don't need $10,000 of credit. It's too much, right? They can't repay it. They don't need 100,000, they don't need 10. They may need 300 or 1,000. And I think the costs of delivering that credit were too high for banks. But I think mobile money aggregating those customers and understanding who they are, I think the intersection of mobile money and banks to provide credit to tens of millions of Burmese will be a breakthrough.
I guess that really is an interesting space, right? Like microfinancing to some extent, paired with also the available data sets. If everyone has a smartphone or that interface to some extent, you have data for alternative credit rating, and with that more accurate credit rating, you can offer credit at a better interest rate, at a repayable interest rate, and also evaluate those amounts accurately.
All of those tools are available. As usual, it's easier said than done, right? And execution is always the test in every market, but particularly in Myanmar, where you have things other countries don't, and you don't have things other countries do. But the tools are available, and I think this is what's been the most interesting feature of the Myanmar financial system over the last 5 years, is it's waking up in the midst of a sort of fintech or technology revolution. Not before, not after, but in the middle of it. And I think this makes it both very exciting to be in the space in Myanmar, but also a challenge to choose the right technology at the right time, with the right resources. But it's certainly not boring.
What do you know about Singapore's involvement in Myanmar now that they're getting a bit more involved?
At YOMA Bank, we have a very close relationship with Singapore. You may know that GIC invested recently and took a large stake in the bank. GIC and some of the sovereign wealth vehicles that Singapore have look very closely at Myanmar. I think, again, they're very focused on good governance and strong partnerships. But another angle which I find very welcome is the leadership position that the regulator takes. MAS is very progressive, certainly around technology and fintech. And I think it gives comfort to other regulators in the region, not only Myanmar, to be more aggressive and more progressive in that respect. So I would say two angles. I think Singapore is certainly putting money to work in Myanmar to help development and help the growth of the financial system. But equally, I think the regulator is leading the way that gives, again, perhaps the Myanmar regulator, but many others, more confidence that they can allow more modern and progressive technologies into the market.
Hal, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for coming on the air and sharing your insights.
Thank you, Karim. It was a pleasure.
Thank you all for watching this Coffee and Conversation, and we'll see you soon.